Poetry. I'd like to introduce
All right.
You can't leave yet.
Definitely not. Smygen on it, so that's the one.
Yeah, that's one. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah. I'll put it on, please.
So please welcome Dr. Irene Riisøy from the University College of Southeast Norway. That's the title of the now found PowerPoint script. She'll be speaking today about legal knowledge in Eddic poetry. What was it? Who possessed it? And whom had access to it? Thank you, Irene.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the organisers there for a really great conference. And today I'm going to talk about, well, combining law and poetry here. So it will actually be very close to what Alex has been talking about now. And I put here with a special focus on gender, but I will also, towards the end of the paper, return to the question of method, because I think a methodological question here. I mean, how can we actually use the Eddic poems to say something about law, and, as I will argue, to say something about Viking Age law. So the question of method here is important. So the Eddic poems, I mean, most of you here are probably familiar with it. Well, I mean, there are actually quite a few poems which have survived. The main manuscript is from about 1270 AD. The composers of these poems are completely unknown. But it's a lot of mythological and heroic matter. So, for example, you meet Odin, Freyja, Frigg, Thor with his hammer, you meet giants, you meet heroes like Sigurd, for example. So, I mean, the names popping up there and what they do are probably familiar for most of you. And as of today, there is definitely no consensus in regards of the dating of the Eddic poems. There is some sort of agreement that they had been in circulation in oral form for a long time before they were put down on parchment. But still, we don't know anything for certain. And law and poetry here is perhaps not the most obvious connection. So I thought just to say a few words how on earth I started with this topic in the first place. And that was when I had a project on outlaws and outlawry in Viking Age and early medieval Scandinavia. And as some of you may know, I see there are lots of saga people here. You probably come across all these huge varieties of outlaws, particularly in the Icelandic sagas. For example, you have the image of the outlaw as a Skogang's mother, a man literally going to the woods, or a person going to the woods. You have various images of the outlaw as a varg, and a varg is probably considered the varg as some kind of really badass wolf. I mean, he was the worst of the worst. And then if you move away from Iceland and to mainland Scandinavia, in Norway you have lots of terminology like utlag, utlegd. In Sweden you have biltåg, you have fredlöshet. In Denmark you have fredlöshet. And in between the various places, the varg and the skog terminology pops up here and there, also outlined outside Iceland. And I was even more confused because when I started looking at the Anglo-Saxon sources, well, because of outlaw and law, I mean, the modern terms for outlaw and law in English today goes back to around, well, the earliest evidence, written evidence, is from the 960s, and it seems to have been brought in with the Vikings, utla and la. But then, it was just looking at legislation, looking at sagas, and looking at the Anglo-Saxon evidence made me a complete mess. Because it was really messy. But then just for some reason, I don't know how I came into it, but then I started to just look through the Eddic and Scandinavian poetry, and then I think I sort of found a pattern out of the big mess, because in the Eddic poems I found skog image connected with outlawry, the skog that we use skog today in modern Scandinavian, that is the wood. And then I found lots of work terminology. I found seker, which is yet another term which evolves in the sort of punishment, guilty, outlaw kind of word group. And then we have this term here, fjord, which basically means your life, and you have the baug, which is the ring, and which ties up nicely with the Icelandic fjordbaugsgard, which is yet another outlawry term. So my conclusion after looking at all these terms for outlawry is that the Eddic poems actually contain the earliest terms and the earliest concepts that we know of in the sources of Scandinavia, which basically means that the term for fredløshet, which very frequently appear in the Danish medieval laws and in some of the Swedish medieval laws, is a more recent term, and the same goes for the Norwegian utlegd terminology. That is definitely more recent. But by the time I reached this conclusion, I suddenly realized that, oh wow, it's a lot more to do on Edda and law. Because in all my previous studies and research, I've been doing basically legal history. From about, well, so far from around 1100s to into the 1600s. But then I decided that now it was time to move back. And that was actually kind of a fortune for me, I think, that I had this kind of legal background. But on the other hand, I didn't have any literary background or any theoretical background concerning the Eddic poems. So I was just looking at them, and I saw that, wow, these are actually quite a few stories here with a very strong legal flavour. For example, gods and heroes and goddesses, they were swearing oaths, they participated at the assembly, you have rules there of single combat, there were scenes where you have legally binding marriages described, inheritance is here, how to often receive compensation, or alternatively, more frequently, when and how to take revenge, and these are just a few examples. I suppose that most of you have heard about the god Bald. And Bald had a horrible nightmare. He dreamed that he was about to die. And then when the gods and the goddesses heard about Bald's dream, they all got really worried. So then they gathered at the assembly, the thing site, to discuss what to do to try and prevent Bald's death. And then one of the things I decided to do was that Frigg, who is Bald's mother, she took an oath from everyone and they promised not to kill Bald. Well, of course, she forgot a mistletoe, and so Bald was killed with mistletoe in the end. But that is just one example which shows all the legal term and sort of legal setting, the assembly, which we actually find in the Eddic poems. And of course, it's also very important to know how to go about such issues. And also, to my sort of great relief, I found that very little has actually been done on this Edda and law. When you look at this, and probably all of you have been through this Realexikon der Germanischen Altertumskunde, I don't know, 1 meter long or something in total, all the volumes. So when I looked at Edda und Recht, I found 3 articles listed. Well, basically 2 articles, because one was a German version of the English one. So wasn't much. I mean, I found more scholars working on this topic since I started working on it, but very little so far. And one of the articles listed here was one by the great historian Aron Gurevich, who wrote about Edda and law. And that was actually the lie of Hyndla that his focus was on. And that was one of the articles that was listed in this Realexikon der romanischen Altertumskunde. This lie of Hyndla is basically about a trial about inheritance. And here you have Uttar and Agantyr, human man in some form. And you have Uttar here, he needs help. So he turns to Freya, who appears to be Uttar's protectress. And Freya again, she goes to the giantess Hyndla. And together they are riding to the sacred assembly sanctuary, and perhaps that is where this trial of inheritance was going to take place. But as part of sort of gaining knowledge of how to get his inheritance, it seems that the poem is very much concerned about Uttar having to learn to recite all his ancestors. It seems that the giantess Hyndla is the one who actually has the knowledge about who Uttar's ancestors was. And this is also what Arngrevich's article, Edda and Law, is very much about. So he placed this poem very much in a legal setting. In a recent study which I come across by Judy Quinn, she has written about liquid knowledge, and her point is that it wasn't enough to hear, as Alex was talking about, the very much performative aspect of going to the assembly is also very much tied up to legal procedure. For example, the way they swore oaths, the way they were, as in this case, learning to sort of learning enough of your ancestor to be able to recite your ancestors and your connection to them at the assembly. So here alcohol comes into play, and it seems that it was very important that Uttar was drinking alcohol so it could actually then stick to his memory. And I think Judy Quinn has got a very, very good point, because alcohol seems to be frequently pops up in the Eddic poems when it was important to learn something. Alcohol law, legal practice in Viking and early medieval, and indeed medieval society in, well, Scandinavia also seem to be very important. I mean, for most Norwegians, at least when you reach my age, would understand an expression like gravøl, which basically means drinking at a funeral, or bachelor, drinking in connection with the birth of a child, and you have drinking connecting with marriage, which is yet another way where alcohol sort of seems to be flowing into the setting where people in some way or other sort of changing their legal status. So here we have females who clearly were in possession of legal knowledge advising a man. And this way of enumerating one's pedigree, it's enough evidence survived both from legislation and, in the case of Norway, also in the case of diplomas, and also taking examples here from archaeology, because the idea of being able to enumerate one's ancestors back to the burial mound, that was a way that you could actually secure your legal claim, because this was a time before any kind of written legal documents, written testimony, etc. Was actually coming to the fore. So, remembering your ancestor, I mean, and then learning them in a way that is stuck to your memory, so you could actually recall that memory when you had a legal claim here coming up, and then reciting backwards. And I've also been looking a little bit on legal maxims in the Eddic poems. I mean, and this is not a complete list, because I just started, because I realized that in Anglo-Saxon studies, for example, maxims are much more integrated into research. But I mean, a maxim is basically sort of a short, well-spoken sentence that sort of sums up some kind of important knowledge that you need. And in this case, it's a Valkyria, who is advising the hero Sigurd, and among the advices here is that speech runes you must know at the assemblies where people must go to fully constituted courts. Again, a very legal advice. And this first term here, speech rune, which is in Old Norse mal runar. There you have the word mal, and we heard in the first talk today that you have word mel, where you have an element in the cloth, and then it was used as a kind of measure and in fact also currency. But the term mal had several meanings. It could mean speech, but it could also mean legal case. And I also now recently found examples that shows that it can actually also mean the assembly itself. So speech runes, I think I took this translation from Caroline Larrington. So speech runes, mal runar, actually have a much wider meaning, and it certainly has a meaning which ties up nicely with the legal sphere as well here. Another one advice here is that you should not swear an oath unless it is truly kept. Terrible fate bonds attached to the oath bearer wretched it's the oath criminal. The oath criminal, the Old Norse word for a criminal here, is actually the varg, which is yet another, I mean, look, every important terms here, I mean, they are legal terms. And also you are advised to go to the assembly and contend with fools. That was... it was also another advice here that comes up, that you should never trust the oath of a wrongdoer's brat. And the term used here, the wrongdoer's brat, is actually a vargdropi, the child of an outlaw, and that is a very rare term, but I've seen it in the Icelandic law code, Grovos. Because as it says there, the wolf is in the young son, so if you have slayed a man, killed a man, then you should certainly not trust the oath of his son, because he would be the one most likely to kill you. Let me see. So then what on earth was legal knowledge? And this of course ties up with what on earth was law in this period. And that is kind of an elusive concept. I mean, today it's easier to define. I mean, you find it in written codexes, and it emanates from state authority, etc. But it seems that procedure is very important in the emergence of early law. I mean, procedure, and that is basically how to go about when you want to raise a case, how you swear an oath, and those kinds of issues. And definitely a very close link with religion. And as Alex said here, sacrifices taking place at assemblies obviously are very important, and it seems that in some way gods and goddesses might also be involved. For example, in connection with oath swearing, when men were out fighting single combat, sacrifices yet again might have taken place. So in various ways, well, religion is also very much tied into the legal sphere here. And as Alex again said, poetry, certainly a very close link with poetry, and also runic inscriptions. And some of the earliest runic inscriptions, in fact, seem to have also legal terminology and also to be coined in poetic language. There is an Australian scholar, is it Rob Mees, who's done, yes, you know him, yes, who's done studies on the very close link between really old law, and then we're talking about 3rd, 4th century AD law and poetry. But that is also something that we see in the Eddic poems. For example, in the Eddic poems I have a lot of examples of oath being sworn, and the way they were swearing their oaths in the Eddic poems, I mean, that is just pure poetry. And there are plenty of examples from sources from continental Europe, from Russia in the east, from Anglo-Saxon England, which shows that Vikings in fact swore their oaths in words coined as poetry. So law then, well, we could perhaps conclude there is sort of a set of rules for proper behavior in this pre-Christian society. And knowledge as well is also a bit, you know, what on earth is knowledge? Well, it's sort of facts. You have to know something about something, information and skill acquired through experience or education. For example, Hyndla here teaching the hero Uttar, or we have Sigdrifa learning legal maxims to Sigurd. Dialogue seemed to be involved, well, plus alcohol, I put here. And also to use various images and items, because as Alexandra said here, it seems to be very important not just to hear, but also to see, to feel, to taste. So they used images like, for example, hazel, which was frequently used to demarcate the assembly, and also to demarcate places when Holmgang was fought, and the hazel demarcation of the place where single combat was taking place is also found described in the Eddic poems, for example. The rings are already mentioned. I mean, rings were used both for oath swearing, rings were used as compensation money. So the rings or the bow seem to have been some sort of all-purpose item in the legal, not just the religious, but also sort of the legal sphere. So yes, everything that could help you to sort of stick what you had to learn into your memory were obviously used. Because, of course, the point was that you should be able to retrieve your knowledge when you needed it. And I suppose for most of us today, if you try to memorize something, if you're able to either link it to items or link it to something spectacular, something make meaning to us, it's actually easier to retrieve to actually then retrieve the knowledge when we need it. I think that the real world, in many ways, were mirroring the mythological world as far as you are in the sphere of law. As I've already said, there was a very close link between law and religion. Repeating Alice here, assembly and sacrifice, law, procedure and sacrifice very much seem to be tied up together. Invocation of gods and goddesses, sacrifice, occasionally in combination again. And I'm also becoming more and more certain that there were some women in Iron Age Scandinavia and also in the wider Germanic world who were very much involved here in this sort of legal process. I mean, it's of course difficult to say anything concrete here, because you have all these characters being given different names, both in poetry and in the real world. In the real world, for example, it seems that you had women called gydja, which is sort of the feminine equivalent of Godar. Ulf Sundqvist, the historian of religion from Sweden, has done a lot of research on the both the Godar and the gydja. You had, for example, the most important assembly in Scandinavia, pre-Christian assembly in Scandinavia, which Alex has been talking about, the Disir thing. And then, of course, you have the Disir, which is a set of females who are actually here connected with the most prominent assembly in Scandinavia. And the place name seems to suggest that the Disir were also present at other assemblies, or at least assemblies were named after the Disir in other parts of Scandinavia as well. If we look at back to the Eddic poems, the ones who are sort of where the term law or lög is connected with in the Eddic poems, and that is actually the Nornir who lived in Ursvel. And Ursvel is also situated very close to the assembly site. I mean, this image from sort of the worldview, and if we can talk about the legal worldview of the Eddic poems, of course, then you have the tree, Yggdrasil, and then which is situated very close to the well, where these normally dwell. The nornies were the ones who conjure up law into the world, and it's also said that this was also a place of judgment, a domarstad, for example. So I think that there are actually lots of evidence in the text, but also in archaeology, that can support the idea that some women, and then we are talking about women belonging to the upper echelons of society, who were important, who actually had legal knowledge, not just to transfer that knowledge to various male heroes, but also because they needed that knowledge in their own right. For example, to claim inheritance, to fight their legal cases, to attend thing assemblies. And Else Nundal, for example, as well as Alex Sandmark, has done studies primarily on the written sources on thing assembly attendance among women, and it seems that based on a gender alone, women weren't denied access to attend the assembly or raise cases or serve as witnesses, etc. But there were some women, in the same way as there were some men, who certainly have more legal knowledge than others, and logically also had more use for legal knowledge than others, and those were the ones on the upper echelons of society. I mean, and then it sort of got less and less. Yes, and then how to proceed further with law and poetry, because that is basically what I'm trying to do. So I'm not trying to piece together like knowledge is one part of it, the assembly is another part, procedure is yet another part. So what I think is that I really have to continue looking for scenes and terminology and compare them with other written sources. And I have an article coming out now which is called Performing Arts in Eddic Poetry. And then I have looked at written sources from outside Scandinavia, but which were written down by Christian authors who came in contact with the Vikings. And as I said, it seems that the odes that has been preserved in the Eddic poems bear a striking resemblance to odes that are recorded in 9th and 10th century written sources outside Scandinavia. So that is one way to move forward. I mean, look at all the sources outside Scandinavia, and of course also to try and come to grip with a better dating of the laws, for example. Archaeology here, as I can see that, yeah, one of the authors is here in the back, said that law is not just good to think, it also has to be practiced. And that I think is also one way to move forward, because archaeology, the way you can actually sort of start to read the landscape and what do you find. And one example here, which has just been, I think it's just 3 or 4 years ago, when you have a place in Sweden called Lilla Ullevi, which is a good example of how archaeology can help us move further. And the place name itself, Ullevi, that consists first of all of the god Ul's name, and in the Eddic poems, Ul is connected with oath. He had an oath ring, and he was also a protector of people who were fighting single combat. So he clearly had a legal meaning in the poetry. But at this Lilla Ullevi, which then has the second element here, could mean a sacred place, but it could definitely also mean the assembly site. And at that place they were found actually quite a few rings. So I think that the excavators there, they made a connection here between the rings and the name, and also this episode in the Eddic poems here. Place names can bring us further, definitely. And yeah, just some pictures here. Yes. So just to conclude then, some females, they certainly attended assemblies and also participated as judges. And females transmitted legal knowledge to teach others, but also because they needed it themselves. So I think that very much the world of the myth, the world that we see in the Eddic poems, is also very much found in the real world. Yes, so I think I should stop.
Thank you very much, Nana. Irene. Fascinating. We've listened to you for hours, but unfortunately lunch is upon us very shortly. But maybe we'll squash in just one short question. If you have a long question, maybe wait for lunch. Yes.
I have an observation. I was really interested in the idea of women having possession of legal knowledge, because one of the things in the textiles that has really been intriguing me, in Iceland you have a situation where women are making textiles, and then there is a legal book telling you how they are supposed to be measured and how many threads and so on. And yet, who has the knowledge of making this stuff? It has to be the women.
Yeah.
So they must be supplying that information. Men are writing it down, but I'm sure they're involved in that in the process. They've got to be. So.
Yes, I totally agree. I mean, what you see in Christianity, for example, is that you actually have some poems where you can see that Jesus and God are actually replacing the norms in the poems, for example. So you see here that the mild gods sort of moving in and trying to take over. And then when you go to the later Middle Ages, when you have written sources, then you have men with memory, and you have Riisøy men. So it might be that gradually men were taking over sort of more and more, both in the world of religion and myth, and also on ground, so to speak.
Thank you. This has been a marvellous, rich and inspiring panel, so I thank you all for being here. I think we should thank our speakers once more, collectively, for all their rich and marvellous papers. Two housekeeping issues. It is lunchtime. That's being served in the cafeteria. I know you all know how to find that. And don't forget that there has been room changes for this afternoon's panels. There was a flyer on your, I think we lost my, oh, here it is. Okay, so just shortly, Recreating the Landscapes is now in G306. And the panel on ethnicity and Scandinavian, Sami and Norse peoples is here. Okay.
Since this woman is making it, and they are the ones that I'm wondering, there's nothing written about who's advising, except they're going to be involved in it because they know how it's made. And they are the ones that must be dictating to them, you do this, you do that. Of course, that totally makes sense. I mean, there's also genetic poetry that, women are informing legal